Hello, my name is Joseph Partain. Welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about atonement theories and baseball. I've been watching videos on YouTube, and this seems to be a kind of popular topic at this moment. And so I've written something, and I'll just go ahead and read it. It's the bottom of the 10th, final game of the World Series. The score is tied. Bases loaded. The batter comes to the plate and points to center field at the bright lights above the stadium. On the first pitch, the ball soars as predicted, smashing the lights. The base is clear, the game is over, the pennant is won. People still talk about that last game-winning play. There are at least 4 theories: the ball placement theory, the lights knocked out theory, the grand slam theory, and the home run theory. As to which best describes how the final play won the game, people pick one or the other of these theories. Interestingly, of all the available theories, and who knows why, the one most despised is the home run theory. Apparently, we're too advanced for that one. It seems outdated, even banal. One could even say that the other theories are chosen out of spite toward that theory. So what is the home run theory? It's a bit crude and simplistic, admittedly, but here goes. When a home run is hit under these circumstances, the batter's team scores at least 1 point, which is all that is needed to win the World Series. That's it. If one were to claim that what was most significant for the win in this last play was either the ball placement, or the lights knocked out, or the grand slam, particularly as if a home run had not taken place, would it not seem strange? It certainly wouldn't explain how the World Series was won. Of course, all these other theories are true. But to state the obvious, they are so because of the home run itself. In other words, they aren't true apart from the home run theory. This baseball analogy comes to mind when I hear talk of different theories of the atonement. 4 of the more popular ones are Christ the Victor, which holds that Christ is victorious over sin, death, and the devil. 1 Corinthians 15, verses 54 to 57, Colossians 2:15. The second one is the recapitulation theory, which says that Christ gives us a do-over of what Adam got wrong. Romans 5:12 to 21. The third one is the moral influence theory, which says that Christ by his cross provides an example to imitate. Philippians 2, verses 1 to 11. Fourth and finally, the Penal Substitutionary Atonement theory, which holds that Christ by his cross is our substitute, covering the debt of our sin as a wrath-averting, grace-procuring sacrifice. Romans 3:19 to 26. As I consider this list, first of all, I wonder if theory is a suitable word to use here. In our baseball analogy, for instance, we may have noticed that the word theory is used to apply to events. The baseball placement, lights knocked out, etc. These are events that no one questions as such. So is it appropriate to call them theories? Are events theories? We understand that the word theory is appropriate when there is a question, when something is unclear or unknown, and therefore calls for various hypothetical explanations. From another angle, when we see fit to speak of any matter as requiring theories, we do something else more fundamental to any consideration of that thing. We frame any discussion of it as questionable. This means it's something the experts don't agree on. However, once this frame is accepted, and regardless of which theory one adopts, what we are all forced to agree on is that if one enters into discussion on the matter of concern, we have to accept the theoretical nature of it. That is, we cannot relate to the subject as if it is clear, straightforwardly evident, and unquestionable. But why should we believe that either with the events in the baseball analogy or what Scripture says about the atonement of Christ, why should we believe that these are theories? As we go down the list of atonement theories just given, we may have noticed biblical references for each one. In other words, as one reads those references, it is evident that the Bible clearly teaches all these things. For us who are under the authority of Scripture, this means that there is nothing questionable, unknown, or unclear about these things. We're not dealing with a matter that requires a theory. Second, I wonder if all four of these doctrines on the atonement have to do specifically with the atonement. It seems to me that the first three, Christ the victor, recapitulation, and moral influence, are associated with the atonement, but are not in themselves the atonement itself. But perhaps I've gotten ahead of myself and an explanation is in order. When the Bible was first translated into English, the word atonement was most unfortunate. It is literally a word put together by the combination of two words plus a suffix, at one meant. The reference, of course, is to reconciliation with God. However, the Hebrew and Greek behind the word translated atonement literally means to cover. Applied to us as sinners, it means to propitiate, that is, avert or appease God's anger and procure his favor. Or it means to pay for sin, to account for it. So what's the problem? The literal meaning of the word atonement is the result that occurs when one's sin is paid for. Obviously, the result is one thing. The event behind the result is another. In other words, when sin is paid for, it is then that we are at one-ment with God. Consequently, to use the word atonement, when the issue is the nature of the event that makes at one-ment happen, only confuses things. For example, let's say I offered to treat some friends at a restaurant. After the meal, when it was time to pay, if we were to leave without paying, that is, without covering the bill, would we be at one-ment with the restaurant? If you think about it, we aren't really at one-ment with the restaurant during the whole time we're eating. All that food we're devouring isn't ours. There is a tension just beneath the surface, a needed reconciliation, as waiters are trained to see to it that the meal we're eating is paid for before we leave. Of course, there's a good faith understanding that we intend to pay. However, it is only when I cover the bill, that is, pay for the meal, that I am at one-ment with the restaurant. As my guests and I go out the door, and both patrons and restaurant are happy campers. We all agree that the cross of Christ brings about reconciliation with God. Where we disagree is on how that reconciliation happens. That is, we're really talking about what it takes to pay for our sin such that there can be reconciliation between us as sinners and a holy God. The real issue, therefore, concerns propitiation, not atonement in its literal meaning. With that said, any so-called theory of atonement that really has nothing to do with God's provided cover, propitiation, or payment for sin by the sacrifice of Christ is not literally a theory of atonement at all. The only theory that provides such an account is the biblical doctrine of the penal substitutionary atonement of Christ. And just as in our baseball analogy, the other events depend on the home run, these other so-called atonement theories depend for their efficacy on penal substitutionary atonement. Sadly enough, we mustn't ignore, both historically and presently, what seems to be the motive behind the formulation of these other quote-unquote theories of atonement. Namely, they serve as alternatives which are proactively dismissive of the biblical doctrine of penal substitutionary atonement. This is done for various reasons. such as a rejection of the biblical teaching about the wrath of God towards sin, or especially to that wrath which in our stead was poured out on God's Son at his crucifixion so that we might be forgiven of sins and eternally saved. To be sure, the Bible clearly teaches these things. But to put it frankly, many people don't like it. They think it's primitive, vulgar, or uncouth. They don't want that kind of God. They prefer a God who is love in the sense that he forgives sin because he wants to, not because he needed to make an offering or satisfy some standard like his own justice in order to do so. That is, they don't want a God who's both a God of love and a God of wrath. It's hard to say this without seeming harsh, but they don't want the God of the Bible. They want a God of their own making. In sum, just as the so-called home run theory makes clear that without that home run, there would have been no pennant-winning play, so also without the so-called penal substitutionary atonement theory, there would be no atonement and no salvation. Thank you for watching this video. I hope it was helpful. May God bless you.